If you're over 65, money stops being about ambition and starts being about responsibility. Not responsibility to the market, not to headlines, not to trends, but responsibility to your life, to your independence, to your peace of mind. At this stage, money has a different job than it did when you were younger. It's no longer there to prove anything. It's there to protect what you already earned. And the biggest mistake I see people make later in life is refusing to accept that reality. I've watched people work for 40 years, save diligently, invest smartly, and then undo years of discipline by holding on to risks they no longer need. They confuse confidence with courage. They confuse growth with safety, and they confuse activity with progress. The market doesn't care how old you are, but your portfolio should. Over 65, the margin for error shrinks, not because you're weaker, but because time becomes more valuable than upside. If someone over 65 asked me what they must own for retirement in 2026, I wouldn't overwhelm them with choices. I wouldn't tell them to chase performance. I wouldn't sell them complexity. I'd tell them the truth. You don't need 10 ETFs. You don't need constant movement. You need stability, income, and protection. You need assets that work quietly while you focus on living, not watching screens. When you're younger, volatility is something you tolerate. When you're retired, volatility becomes something you manage carefully. A sharp downturn at the wrong time doesn't just hurt returns, it forces decisions. And forced decisions are almost always bad ones. That's why structure matters more now than ever. The first ETF I would insist someone over 65 owns is one built around reliable income and stability. Income is not a bonus in retirement. It's a foundation. When cash flow comes in regularly, you don't have to sell assets when markets are down. You don't have to panic when prices fluctuate. Income gives you control, and control is the most underrated asset in retirement. An income-focused ETF, built from companies with long histories of paying and growing dividends, does something important psychologically as well as financially. It shifts your mindset from price watching to ownership. You stop asking what the market did today and start focusing on what your assets produce. That change alone reduces stress and improves decision-making. Companies that consistently pay dividends are usually disciplined companies. They can't afford reckless expansion. They have to manage debt, expenses, and capital allocation carefully. They don't promise miracles. They deliver results, and over long periods of time, that discipline shows up in resilience. These are businesses that survive recessions, inflation, and uncertainty because they've already planned for them. The second ETF I would insist on is one designed to preserve purchasing power. Inflation is the quiet enemy of retirement. It doesn't make headlines the way crashes do, but it does far more damage over time. People retire thinking they've won, only to discover 10 or 15 years later that their money doesn't stretch the way it used to. That's not bad luck. That's poor planning. Owning an ETF tied to inflation-protected securities or assets that adjust with rising prices isn't about fear. It's about realism. Governments borrow. Currencies fluctuate. Costs rise. Pretending otherwise doesn't make you optimistic. It makes you exposed. Over 65, you don't have the luxury of ignoring slow erosion. This type of ETF won't excite you. It won't impress anyone, but it serves a critical role. It defends the real value of what you've built. It ensures that your savings continue to mean something in real terms, not just on paper. Protection isn't pessimism, it's maturity. The third ETF I would insist someone over 65 owns is one that represents broad, diversified ownership in the productive economy, but without concentration risk. Growth still matters in retirement, but it has to be measured, diversified, and controlled. You don't need to chase innovation. You just need to participate in it responsibly. A broad market equity ETF gives you exposure to thousands of businesses across sectors, sizes, and industries. It spreads risk automatically. As companies rise, they become a larger part of the index. As they fall, they fade away. You don't have to predict anything. You just stay invested in human productivity. This matters because retirement isn't a short phase anymore. People live longer. Healthcare improves. Lifestyles stay active. Growth helps portfolios keep up with longevity. But concentrated growth can create sleepless nights. Broad ownership smooths that risk. What I like about this kind of ETF is that it removes ego from the equation. You're not betting on one CEO, one technology, or one idea about the future. You're betting on people continuing to work, innovate, and build. That's a bet that has paid off for generations. When you put these three ETFs together, something powerful happens. You stop reacting to markets and start relying on structure. You have income coming in, protection against inflation, and exposure to long-term growth. You're not dependent on perfect timing. You're prepared for imperfect conditions. Most people over 65 don't need more information. They need fewer decisions. Complexity increases the chance of mistakes. Simple portfolios are easier to manage, easier to understand, and easier to stick with when emotions rise. And emotions will rise. Markets don't get calmer just because you're retired. I've always believed that money should simplify life, not complicate it. If your portfolio makes you anxious, it's not doing its job. And anxiety usually comes from misalignment. Assets that were perfect at 40 may be inappropriate at 65. Adjusting isn't weakness, it's wisdom. One of the most damaging ideas in investing is that you have to stay aggressive to stay relevant. That's nonsense. You've already done the hard part. You built, you saved, you invested. Now the goal is to preserve dignity, independence, and choice. That requires restraint, not bravado. I've seen retirees chase returns because they're afraid of missing out, only to end up missing what actually matters: time with family, peace of mind, confidence that their future is secure. No market rally is worth sacrificing those things. The beauty of a 3 ETF retirement structure is that it frees mental energy. You stop obsessing over what to buy next. You stop reacting to noise. You let assets do their job quietly while you focus on living well. If someone over 65 asks me how often to adjust this portfolio, I tell them not often, maybe once a year, maybe less. Overmanagement is a hidden cost. It increases stress and rarely improves outcomes. Stability beats cleverness in retirement. I'd also tell them this clearly: there will still be downturns. There will still be bad years. That's normal. The difference now is that your portfolio is designed to handle them without forcing action. That's the real victory. At this stage of life, success isn't measured by beating an index. It's measured by sleeping well, paying bills easily, and knowing you don't have to make decisions under pressure. The market doesn't reward panic, and retirement doesn't forgive it. If you structure your assets around income, protection, and broad growth, you don't need predictions. You need patience. You don't need excitement. You need reliability, and reliability is what allows wealth to fulfill its final purpose. Because money isn't meant to be managed forever. It's meant to support a life well lived.